Okay, so what's the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics? Well, macro is the whole forest, okay? It is, well, let's keep it in economic terms. It's the whole economy. Micro is individual markets. So, in the labor market, doctors, truck drivers, accountants, teachers, they're just all lumped together and called labor in macroeconomics. In microeconomics, well, we do recognize that they are individual markets, that there are differences, okay? So when we say macroeconomics is the whole economy or the whole forest, we're just looking broadly, not too much detail. In microeconomics, we're looking at what kind of trees there are. We're looking closer. In the goods market, tennis rackets, automobiles, oranges, okay, computers. In macroeconomics, they're just all goods and services, right? In micro, we do make a distinction. So macro, we talk about broad measures of economic activity like gross domestic product, and where we just look at the value of all final goods and services produced in the economy, period. And in micro, again, we look at different markets. The technology sector is different than the financial sector, for example. Okay? Now, there's a couple of other ways to dissect economics. Okay, there is positive economics and normative. Positive economics makes a claim about what is, how the world actually works. Okay, so I'm going to just put what is. Normative economics talks more about how things should be. Okay, what should be. Let's see if I dare write. Let's see if anybody can read that. So positive economics will make a claim about, if interest rates fall, then demand for homes increases, okay? That kind of thing. 2 + 2 = 7. That's positive economics. Now, we know 2 + 2 does not equal 7. It's still positive economics. The thing about positive economics is that you can refute it. You can gather data and actually refute the proposition. So it doesn't have to be true, it just has to be refutable. Whereas normative economics, we're talking about values and ideology, and some people, what one person thinks is fair may be very different than what someone else thinks is fair. For example, if you're talking about things that are fair, I mean, ask 100 people what fair means, and you could easily get 100 different answers. So we're going to focus on positive economics. That's what this course is about. And, we can talk about what's fair all day long and never come to a conclusion and frankly never learn anything. So let me give you a few examples, okay? You tell me if this is normative or positive. Rent control causes apartment shortages. Is that a normative statement or a positive statement? Versus, we need rent control to keep housing affordable for the poor. See the difference? Rent control causes apartment shortages. That is making a claim about what rent control does. What happens? If this, then that. That's positive. That's a positive statement. We need rent control to keep housing affordable for the poor. Well, that's an opinion. Maybe we don't need to keep it affordable. Maybe keeping it affordable is, you know, it's going to cause apartment shortages, which is what it does. Okay? So if you have severe shortages, actually rent controls, where it's been tried, homelessness has increased. So yes, it keeps it affordable, but if there's nothing available, see, that's a problem. Yeah, it's affordable, but none of them exist. There are no apartments to rent, right? Doesn't matter how affordable it is if it doesn't exist. Okay, if the price of beer goes up, students will drink less. Yeah, well, that's a positive statement. You know, we'll learn about that when we talk about supply and demand. When the price rises of something, quantity demanded falls. All right? Versus the price of beer should be increased because students drink too much. Well, sounds like kind of a normative thing, doesn't it? I mean, how do you gather data on that? Well, maybe they do drink too much. Maybe the grades will go up if we lower the price of beer and they drink a little bit before class. I doubt it. But it's a normative statement. It doesn't have. Okay, see, that makes sense to me personally. But that isn't the metric that determines whether it's normative or not. Okay, it's normative, whether it makes sense or not. Okay, it's still something that you can't necessarily gather data. It's an opinion on the way things ought to be. Okay, so we've got positive and normative. We've got micro and macro, and then we've got positive and normative. And then we've got, well, let me add this. A lot of the debates in economics are normative. Oh, they say economists can't agree about anything, but economists are people too, more or less. They have ideas, they have values, they have ideology, they have opinions on the way things ought to be. So, again, this is a lot of fun to argue about, talk about, but if we did that, how much of this could we do? So the course is really about what we know about economics. And, there will be some normative issues, don't worry. Okay, now, now we're going to talk about economic models. Okay? Whoops. Well, let's spice it up with a different color. Economic models. A model is a simplification of reality. That's what a model is. Now, a map is a great example of a model. A map, let's say a map of Syracuse. If it has your house on it, how good a map is it? I mean, that's a lot of detail if it has all the houses. You'd have to have this enormous map. There's a model that probably, I would say most certainly provides too much detail. If your goal is to just kind of get around Syracuse, you don't want a map with every single teeny tiny thing on it. That's too big. So you could argue that, well, a model is unrealistic. Well, yeah, it's a simplification of reality. It's a simplification, which means it's unrealistic. But you got to look at the purpose for which we're going to use the model. if the use is to get around Syracuse, then a map of the roads, the main roads, is what you need, and it's usable. So models are, by definition, unrealistic. What we do is we try to weed out information, items that are not important to the model, details. You know, we want to get rid of all the stuff that we don't want to deal with and just focus on the things that we do. Okay, physicists make assumptions about gravity and friction, and they often will use a vacuumless tube. Okay, so that's unrealistic. Excuse me, vacuum. They use a frictionless vacuum. No friction. That's unrealistic, right? But it helps them determine what the limits are. When you know what the limits are on either end, that's useful information. Economists make several assumptions in building models, and one assumption is ceteris paribus. When we do our analysis, we're assuming all else equal, okay? Or all else remains the same. Ceteris paribus means we're going to change one variable and all the others don't change. Now, if you've had multivariable calculus, it's a partial derivative. That's when you let one variable change and all the others don't change. That way you can isolate how that one particular variable affects, something else. So, for example, if we want to know what affects the demand curve for bicycles, well, we can look at the price of the bicycle, the price of cars, the price of skateboards, maybe a substitute, things like that. Income certainly plays a part. So we would change, if we're going to change, we want to see how bikes respond to a change in income, we would hold the price of other goods constant. Because if we let them all change at the same time, we can't isolate what's going on there with income. So we ceteris paribus, one of the big assumptions. Another assumption, and this is, we won't talk about all of them right now. I'm just listening to some of the main ones. Another one that gets a lot of heat because it's so widely misunderstood, I think, is that it's assumed that we economists assume people are rational in their choices. Well. We know people aren't always rational, right? So there is an unrealistic assumption. It's unrealistic. How can we use an assumption that's unrealistic? Well, we're not saying people are rational all the time, but what we're saying is they're rational enough most of the time to make it a useful predictor of human behavior. We don't say, here's a common misconception of that is by saying people are rational, what it doesn't say, what it does not mean is that people never make a mistake. No, that's not what rational means. What rational means, at least in the economic sense, is that people will choose purposefully based on the information they currently have. They'll make the best choice for themselves based on current information. So if I'm out in the market to buy a used car, or any car, I may check a couple of dealers in Syracuse. Well, then maybe I should check a couple of dealers in Rochester. And then, okay, maybe Buffalo, maybe Albany, maybe Boston. At some point, you've got to make a decision. No, you don't have all the information on every single used car in the world. But at some point, the cost of getting more information exceeds the benefit of getting more information. A rational consumer will draw the line at some point and say, you know what? I've got I've got lots of information. I'm going to have to make a decision. Now, it could turn out that there was a car in Atlanta that was exactly what he wanted, better price. So you could say he made a mistake. It was irrational to buy the one in Rochester. He missed it. See, it's a misunderstanding. So, at some point you've got to make a decision based on limited information, and there's an optimal amount of information. So yes, people make mistakes all the time. People do dumb things all the time. We see it especially when the benefits and the costs are separated by time. For example, smoking. Yeah, it's irrational to smoke, but the benefits are today, or eating enchiladas, too much pizza. That's my thing. The benefits are right now. Oh, they're so good. They're so good. And the costs are way out in the future. So that's an area where what we need to do is take the present value of those costs, bring them back to the present, and then yes, the costs do exceed the benefits, but people have trouble with what we call intertemporal choice. But anyway, yes, people are not rational all the time, but overall it's a fairly good predictor of human behavior. People will buy more at lower prices. They'll buy less at higher prices. Okay, they tend to prefer short lines to long lines. Okay, that kind of thing. They don't purposely try to make decisions that harm themselves overall. Okay. All right. Well, that is, we got just a couple other things. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but some things we're going to run into in the course, some things that we will come up, and that is association is not the same as causation. Okay? Just because something happens at the same time, they're associated together, but that don't nearly always, one doesn't necessarily cause the other. All right. So one of my favorite examples is it is true that married men make more money than single men. So there's an association there. Money, marriage. But does one cause the other? And if so, which one? Does the marriage cause the money? Meaning, well, after a man gets married, he's motivated. He's going to go out there and work harder. Or does the money cause the marriage? Well, the guys with the money are a little more attractive, right? So sometimes causation is hard to determine, but just because something are associated doesn't necessarily mean that there's one causes the other, or if they do it, sometimes it's difficult to determine which way. What else is interesting here? The secondary here's one. Outcome. Oh, my writing's atrocious. I'm sorry. Is not necessarily I would say outcome is independent of intent. We sure wish that weren't true. People with great hearts do things that can, they intend for it to go well. I would say one example, raising the minimum wage, let's say, to $30. Let's pick an outrageous number. You know, economists debate over exactly at what point does the minimum wage cause unemployment. As we will see, if the minimum wage is below the equilibrium or market clearing wage, it doesn't cause any unemployment. Of course, it doesn't really do anything because the wage was market wage is higher anyway. But if you raise the minimum wage above our market clearing wage, jobs will be lost. So where exactly that point is debatable, but let's pick a number, $50 an hour. How's that? You know, if they actually pass a law that says the minimum wage is $50, I gotta believe that their intent, they just had great big hearts and they wanted to help people. But what would be the outcome? The outcome would be a disaster. Nobody could hire anybody. Nobody would have jobs. I mean, businesses would go out, you know. So anyway, so that is our little introduction to basic economics. What is some of the things that we're going to talk about during the semester?